Think about clicking "I agree" to endless terms online. Or just the hoops we jump through to prove we actually own some digital thing. It feels a bit like the Wild West sometimes, doesn't it?
It really does. How do we even establish real, universal trust in this digital space,
Hmm.
especially when everything's changing so fast?
Exactly. And that's really the core problem Sign seems to be tackling head on.
hmm Yeah, in this deep dive, we're looking at their latest overview doc. It's dated April 25th, 2025, and we're going to try and unpack their pretty ambitious vision. They want to build this global backbone for verifying credentials, distributing digital assets, the whole nine yards.
Right. Our goal today is basically to cut through all the noise and give you the essential understanding of Sign. We'll look at the tech, the actual real world stuff they're doing, and why their own token, SIGM, is such a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, so by the end, you should really get how Sign is trying to bring, as they put it, trust to trustless networks
Hmm.
and ultimately push blockchain adoption forward.
Okay, so let's just get right into it. What are the main building blocks here? What makes up the Sign ecosystem?
Well, the foundation really is the Sign protocol. You can think of it as a kind of universal translator between blockchains. They call it an omni-chain attestation protocol.
Omni-chain attestation. Okay.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it's dual focus. It's designed to be foundational infrastructure for governments, but also provide core tools for, dApps decentralized applications.
Right.
So its main jobs are verifying digital identities, proving ownership of digital assets, and validating contracts or agreements across different blockchain networks.
Okay, so the sign protocol is that base layer connecting things. And what about TokenTable? Where does that fit in?
So TokenTable is built on top, you could say. It's a platform based on smart contracts, and it's specifically designed for distributing digital tokens.
Ah, okay. Distribution.
Exactly. It handles all the mechanics,
Yeah.
airdrops, vesting schedules for investors releasing tokens over time, handling scheduled token unlocks, basically all the infrastructure you need to manage the life cycle of tokens after they're created.
And it sounds like it's being used quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely. To give you an idea of the scale, it's already distributed over $4 billion worth of tokens.
Wow. Okay. 4 billion. That's serious usage. So protocol for verification, TokenTable for distribution.
Got it. Now, what about the fuel for this engine, the CGN token itself? What's its main purpose or purpose of
Right. The CJAN token, it basically has three core uses outlined. First, they call it universal utility,
universal utility?
meaning it's meant to power everything, all of the same protocols, the apps, any future stuff they build in the ecosystem. It's the fundamental unit for operations.
Okay.
Second, it's pitched as a global community currency. The idea here is to let the community earn it, stake it, spend it, even come up with new ways to use it themselves, really foster an active ecosystem. Interesting. So it's not just about tech, it's about building that community around it too. Makes sense. And the third purpose.
The third one is holding for alignment. The vision is that people who hold SIGN long-term, the active participants, will eventually get a say in the strategic direction of the whole ecosystem.
Ah, okay. So it encourages long-term commitment.
Precisely. Aligning incentives.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so this all sounds good on paper, but is it actually happening? Is there real world activity or is it still mostly theory?
No, this is where it gets quite compelling, actually. Sign isn't just an idea floating around. The Sign protocol is already powering several live applications right now.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, first they mention Sign. They say it's the first on-chain e-signature DApp. Think of it like DocuSign, but living directly on the blockchain.
Okay, blockchain e-signatures.
And then, of course, there's TokenTable itself, which we just talked about already, a major player in token distribution.
Right, okay. So those are sort of internal apps showing off their tech. What about broader adoption out in the wild?
Well, beyond their own tools, they've built SignPass. That's their system for on-chain identity registration and verification.
Sign tasks, okay.
And this is where the real-world adoption part really kicks in. Sign's tech is actually live and being used today in the UAE, in Thailand, and in Sierra Leone.
Wow, okay. Actual countries using it.
Yeah, and what's maybe even more striking is they're actively expanding into over 20 more countries. They specifically mention Barbados and Singapore as examples. They're framing it as paving the way for super sovereign infrastructure on-chain.
Super sovereign infrastructure, that's a big claim, but having national level usage is serious validation. And speaking of validation, I think the report mentions some pretty impressive revenue.
Absolutely. They generated $15 million in revenue in 2024.
15 million.
Yeah, and what's really remarkable about that number is It actually exceeds the total capital they've raised so far, which is $32 million.
Wait, they made more in revenue last year than they've raised in total.
Exactly. So this isn't just about potential down the road. It shows, strong product market fit already. It positions them as a revenue positive Web3 infrastructure provider, which is pretty rare in this space.
Yeah, definitely a powerful sign. What about the usage numbers for the tech itself? Is it seeing real traction beyond just the revenue?
The growth stats from 2024 are quite something. The adoption of what they call sign protocol schemas, think of them like templates for these on-chain proofs. It jumped massively, went from 4,000 to 400,000.
Wow, that's a huge leap.
And the number of attestations, the actual proofs being made on-chain, exploded from around 685,000 to over 6 million. So yeah, the numbers definitely suggest growing real-world use.
Those are substantial numbers, no doubt. It sounds like they're building a pretty significant ecosystem. They also mentioned something called the Orange Dynasty. What's that about?
Ah, the Orange Dynasty. It's described as a kind of unifying force for builders in the sign ecosystem who share their vision. It seems to be their branding for fostering this global cultural community around the project.
Okay, like a community rallying point.
Yeah, more than just a name. It's about building an engaged group that believes in what they're doing.
Gotcha. And in terms of, the money side, the backing, who are the key investors behind Sign?
They've definitely attracted some big names. As I mentioned, they raised $32 million total. The seed funding was led by various arms of Sequoia Capital US, China, India, Southeast Asia.
Sequoia, okay. That's significant.
And their Series A round was led by YZ Labs. Having those kinds of Tier 1 investors definitely underlines the potential people see in Sign's vision.
All right, so we've covered the what and the why. Let's maybe dig a little deeper into the how. How does the Sign protocol actually achieve this omni-chain coverage they talk about? It sounds complex.
It is quite sophisticated. They use a few different strategies to connect with all these different blockchain environments. There's native public multi-chain deployment, so they can integrate directly with various public chains like Ethereum, etc.
Okay.
Then they also offer native sovereign blockchain deployment. This is more for, say, a government that wants a customized solution, maybe complete control over their own chain infrastructure.
Right, a private or a specific chain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then for cases where, cost is key and maybe you don't need direct smart contract interaction across chains all the time, they use Arweave as a kind of fallback data storage layer.
Arweave for storage, okay.
And then to tie it all together and make all this data searchable, they have something called SignScan, which is their high-performance indexer. So it's really about offering different options depending on what the user actually needs.
That makes sense, yeah. A tiered approach depending on the use case. What about security and privacy? Especially if you're dealing with sensitive stuff like identity verification.
Yeah, that's obviously central. They use a combination of asymmetrical encryption and zero-knowledge proofs.
Zero-knowledge proofs, right. Heard a lot about those.
What's pretty clever is how they can use ZK proofs to hide or redact the sensitive bits of information while still allowing the verification itself to be publicly audited on-chain.
How does that work in practice?
Well, the example they gave is scanning a passport. You could prove your country of residence, or maybe that you're over 18, by scanning your passport. The zero-knowledge proof verifies that fact on-chain, but the actual passport data, it never leaves your device.
Ah, okay. That's a really neat way to balance the need for verification with keeping user data private.
Very cool.
Now let's circle back to TokenTable for a second. You called it the Swiss Army knife of token distributions. What gives it that flexibility?
Well, part of it is just its broad support for different blockchain ecosystems. It works with EVM chains, Ethereum, Polygon, many others, but also Starknet, Solana, TON, and even MoveVM chains.
So pretty much covers the major bases.
Right. This means projects building on all sorts of different platforms can use TokenTable without issue. And it achieves this versatility using different underlying architectures, kind of tailored for specific jobs.
Could you maybe elaborate just a bit on those different architectures?
Sure. They have what they call the unlocker. This is fully on-chain, fully trustless, designed for managing token unlocks based on set schedules. Very configurable.
Okay, on-chain unlocks.
Then there's the Merkle-based distributor. This is more of a hybrid approach. It balances flexibility and gas costs, good for both unlocks and airdrops.
Hybrid, got it.
And finally, the signature-based distributor. This one offers the most flexibility. It can handle really complex airdrop rules, even pulling in off-chain data, like, say, social media activity or something.
Okay, so different tools for different kinds of distribution jobs.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Exactly.
All right, let's pivot then to the SIGN token itself. What can you tell us about the tokenomics? Supply, distribution, that sort of thing.
Okay, tokenomics. As of late April 2025, the total supply and the maximum supply of SIGN are both fixed at 10 billion tokens.
10 billion total.
Yep. And when it initially lists, the circulating supply is expected to be 1.2 billion SIGN. That's 12% of the total.
All right, 12% circulating initially. And we have some key metrics from April 10th, 2025, just to lock those figures in for listeners.
That's right. Token name is SIGN. It's both an ERC20 on Ethereum and native on its own infrastructure. Initial circulating on Binance, expect at 1.2 billion. Max in total supply, both 10 million.
Got it. The report also mentions a specific Binance airdrop. What are the details there?
Yeah, they've set aside 350 million SIGN tokens just for what they're calling the Binance Hodlers airdrop. That's scheduled to start on April 28th, 2025.
350 million for Binance holders. Okay. So how's the rest of the supply split up? What are the main allocation buckets?
Looking at the breakdown they provide, 7.5% is for general airdrops. Then there's the 5% for the Binance Hodler airdrop we just mentioned, and another smaller 0.5% for a Binance Alpha airdrop.
Okay, so quite a bit for airdrops overall.
Yeah. Then there's 1% set aside for liquidity and campaigns on centralized exchanges. And then the biggest chunk, 86%, is labeled as institution project controlled.
86%. Wow, that's a very large portion controlled internally or by institutions.
It is. And obviously transparency around how that's managed over time will be pretty important for the community.
Definitely something to watch. Now, the report also makes a distinction between the reported day one circulating percent and the day one real float percent. What's the difference there? Why should people care?
Right, that's an important nuance. The reported day one circulating percent is that 12% figure the tokens that are technically unlocked on-chain according to the schedule.
Okay.
But the day one real float percent is estimated at 8.5%. This represents the tokens they actually expect to be circulating freely on the open market, ready to be traded.
Ah, so the difference is tokens that are unlocked but may be held by the team or investors and not immediately being sold.
Exactly. It accounts for tokens held by institutions or the project itself that likely won't hit the market right away. So that real float number, the 8.5%, is probably a better indicator of the actual supply available for trading initially, which, can affect prices.
That's a really crucial distinction for anyone looking at the tokens market dynamics right at launch. Good to know.
Huh?
The airdrop part is broken down further in an airdrop cluster analysis. Who's getting that 5% allocation beyond the Binance-specific ones?
Yeah, that 5% general airdrop is targeted at rewarding their early supporters and community members. It includes holders of their Seeing Signs, NFTs, and SignPass NFTs.
Perfect, is okay.
Also SignPass permanent residents.
Yeah.
Whatever that entails exactly. Holders of Orange Dynasty, SPTs, those are soul-bound tokens, basically non-transferable badges of community membership.
Right, SPTs.
Also, Orange Dynasty community contributors, early users of their products, and people who supported their programs. It's basically a way to thank the early believers and get the token into the hands of active community members.
Makes sense. Reward the OGs. And lastly, on tokenomics, the report gives some initial wallet addresses for the main allocations at TGE, the token generation event. Can you just briefly mention those?
Yes, they list specific on-chain wallet addresses for the initial buckets: airdrop, private investors, the team, community funds, ecosystem funds, and the foundation.
Okay.
But, and this is important, they include a disclaimer saying that the tokens meant for the initial liquidity pools might be moved before spot trading actually starts. So the balances in those specific listed wallets could change right around launch time.
Good heads up for anyone trying to track wallets on day one. Okay, shifting gears again, let's look ahead. What does the roadmap look like for Sign? What have they already ticked off and what's coming up?
Well, they've definitely hit some significant milestones already. They point to launching ETH Sign way back in Q3 2021, TokenTable in Q2 2023, and the Sign protocol itself more recently in Q1 2024.
Okay, so steady product launches.
Yeah, and key partnerships, too. They mentioned integrating ETHSign with Singapore's SingPass system in late 2023, collaborating with Plaid in Q2 2024, which lets people verify U.S. bank balances on-chain.
Plaid integration. Interesting.
Their partnership with Sierra Leone for the e-visa system, also Q2 2024. The quick adoption of TokenTable in the TON ecosystem in Q3 2024. And, like we discussed, hitting that $15 million revenue mark in Q4 2024 and closing their Series A funding early this year, Q1 2025.
That's a pretty solid track record of actually shipping things and getting deals done.
So what's next? What's on the slate for the rest of 2025?
Their current roadmap for Q2 through Q4 2025 has three main things. In Q2, they're planning to launch the Sign Super App, sounds like a mobile app for their community.
Super app. Okay.
Q3 is focused on driving more government-level product adoption as they continue expanding globally.
Makes sense, building on that early traction.
And then in Q4, they aim to launch something called the Sign Media Network. The goal seems ambitious, turning their social media into a global journalist syndicate. A journalist syndicate, that's
Yeah.
different. An interesting direction for their comms. The report also talks about progress on the commercial and business development side, especially with governments.
Yes, definitely. They're actively working on what they call a sovereign layer 2 stack.
Mhm.
It's basically a customizable roll-up as a service, but tailored specifically for governments.
RAS for governments, okay.
And they've signed MOU's memorandums of understanding with both Barbados and Thailand to pilot national blockchain infrastructure.
Oh, wow, actual pilot programs.
Yeah. In Barbados, they've apparently developed a whole integrated solution, blockchain, digital ID, even a stablecoin-based UBI system.
Right.
They expect a public testnet launch for that this month, May 2025.
UBI pilot, okay. And Thailand?
In Thailand, they're working together with the government to co-develop blockchain and digital ID systems. The first announcement on that is expected also in May, and there's potential for significant national funding coming within the next 4 months or so.
Okay, so those government partnerships seem to be moving from MOUs to actual implementation. That sounds pretty pivotal.
It really does seem like a key part of their strategy and growth potential.
All right. So finally, for listeners who found this interesting and maybe want to learn more, get involved, where should they go? What community channels or resources are out there?
Sure. If you want to dig deeper, they have official and community channels on X, formerly Twitter. The handles are x.com/methsign and x.com/sign. For Telegram, it's t.messeverything-on-chain and t.me-or-ange-dynasty.
Okay, X and Telegram.
And they also provide pretty extensive documentation for all their main products. For Sign Protocol, it's docs.sign.global. For TokenTable, docs.tokentable.xyz. Fsign is docs.ssign.xyz. And SignPass is signpass.world.
Great. Lots of reading material there for the dedicated.
Absolutely. Plenty for your own deep dive if you're interested.
Fantastic. So just to quickly wrap up then, Sign's core mission is really about building this foundational global layer for digital trust, focusing on credential verification with the Sign protocol and efficient token distribution with TokenTable.
Exactly. And they're showing significant real-world traction already, especially with governments, which is pretty unique. And their SiGene token is key to powering it all and aligning everyone involved.
Right. And for you, our listener, hopefully this gives you a solid insight into a project that's not just talking about Web3 infrastructure, but seems to be actively building and deploying it at scale. The revenue, the government partnerships, these suggest a potential path for blockchain moving beyond just niche uses.
Yeah, potentially becoming a fundamental part of how society operates digitally.
And that kind of brings us to our final thought for you to mull over. As things like digital identity and verifiable on-chain info become more and more embedded in our lives, what are the bigger implications? The societal shifts that infrastructure like Sign could bring about. How might it actually reshape how we interact online and even how we interact with big institutions?
Definitely something to think about. It's worth checking out those resources we mentioned and continuing your own exploration into this whole evolving space.